The neon lights of Lunaris flickered like a dying star, which wasn't too far off from the truth. Lunaris, the so-called crown jewel of human lunar colonization, was more like a cracked tiara on a medieval princess, shiny at a distance but falling apart at the seams. And here was Riven Solace, the city's most reluctant hero, adjusting his neural jack in a back-alley tech den. "You sure this thing won't fry my brain, Tech?" Riven asked, side-eyeing the greasy technician who was half his size and twice as annoying. "Would it matter? Not like you use it much," Tech replied with a smirk, adjusting his goggles that made his eyes look like two bulbous fly heads. Riven chuckled dryly as he leaned back, the cold metal chair biting through his coat. "Just hook me up, you little goblin. I've got a job that needs done before the aliens turn this place into their own personal scrapyard." "Fine, fine," Tech muttered, jabbing a probe into Riven's neural port with all the delicacy of a drunken surgeon. "You're live in 5-4. The world around Riven dissolved into digital static, the sights and sounds of Lunaris replaced by lines of code and virtual doorways. He was in his element now, the master of a domain few dared tread. His fingers danced over non-existent keyboards, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. Somewhere in the digital ether, he heard the distinct ping of an incoming message. Vex Farron, his partner in cybernetic crime, was on the line. "Riven, you hacking into the Viceroy's accounts again?" "Nah, just your mother's," Riven replied, grinning as he sifted through the data streams. "Turns out she's still subscribing to that interplanetary knitting club. Good to know her hobbies are intact. Anyway, listen up. You heard about the aliens." Riven frowned as he navigated through layers of sensitive information. "The visitors with a penchant for strip mining and bad manners. Yeah, I've heard a thing or two. They've got a plan, mate. They're looking to dismantle us piece by piece, starting with our defenses." "Isn't that just their style?" Riven muttered, pulling out of the system and back into the dingy room where Tech was waiting, scratching his nose with a soldering iron. "I suppose sitting around and hoping they just go away isn't on the table, is it?" Vex's voice crackled with static, but his sarcasm came through loud and clear. "Not unless you fancy living under alien overlords." Riven sighed, the weight of the world, or at least this crumbling colony, settling on his shoulders. "Looks like we're gonna have to be the heroes here." "Oh joy," Vex replied. The blind leading the blind. They had a plan, as much as two misfits trying to save a colony from alien invasion could call a plan viable. Riven pocketed his gear, threw a credit chip at Tech, and headed out into the polluted air of Lunaris. The city was a cacophony of sounds and lights, all trying desperately to mask the underlying despair. Vex was waiting at their usual spot, a rundown bar that served drinks weaker than a Martian's handshake. He was nursing a glass of something vaguely alcoholic when Riven slid into the seat opposite him. "Did you bring the fireworks?" Vex grinned, patting a satchel at his side. "Enough to make a small sun." "Perfect," Riven said, signaling the bartender for a drink. "Let's go say hello to our visitors, make sure they know Lunaris isn't for sale." The two stood, the weight of their decision not lost on them. They were going to war, not just with aliens, but with the apathy of their own kind. As they stepped out into the grimy streets, the sky above crackled with distant thunder, a fitting prelude to the storm they were about to unleash. "So," Riven said as they made their way to the transport hub, "you think we stand a chance against a technologically superior alien race bent on our destruction?" Vex considered, then shrugged. "We might survive long enough to run away." "Comforting," Riven replied with a chuckle, his heart pounding in anticipation or fear. He couldn't tell which. "Let's make sure we give them a proper human welcome, yeah." "With bells on," Vex said, a wicked grin splitting his face. Their transport rattled through the colony, past the stalls of vendors selling authentic Earth memorabilia, all made in some sweatshop on Titan, no doubt. The locals barely glanced their way, too caught up in their own survival to care about the two fools who thought they could take on the universe. "You hear the latest news, Riven?" Vex asked as they arrived at the launch bay, a cavernous expanse filled with ships in varying states of disrepair. "If it's about the governor's latest scandal, I don't care," Riven replied, checking their equipment with methodical precision. "Nah, it's about the aliens. Supposedly they communicate via scented pheromones." Riven raised an eyebrow. "So what, we're gonna assault them with soap and perfume?" Vex laughed, a sound that echoed off the metal walls. "Couldn't hurt, but seriously, if we can disrupt their communication, we might stand a chance," Riven finished. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot we've got." They climbed aboard their ship, a battered freighter affectionately dubbed the Rust Bucket. The interior was just as uninspiring as the exterior, but it was functional, and that was all that mattered at this point. "Ready for lift-off?" Vex asked, strapping himself in. "As I'll ever be," Riven replied, punching coordinates into the nav system. The engines roared to life, a sound that was both comforting and terrifying. As they ascended, Riven glanced out at the lunar landscape below, a barren wasteland that was nonetheless home. "You ever think about what life would be like if we just gave up, let them have it?" "Sure," Vex said. "And then I remember I hate tentacles." They shared a laugh, a brief moment of levity before the storm. Their destination loomed ahead, a massive alien vessel that seemed to glimmer in the starlight. It was larger than anything Lunaris had, a testament to their technological superiority. "There she is," Riven murmured, eyes fixed on the alien craft. "The mother of all beehives." "And here we are," Vex added, checking the charge on his plasma rifle. Two idiots in a tin can. They approached cautiously, skimming the surface of the alien ship until they found a suitable entry point. "Let's do this," Riven said, heart pounding. They breached the hull, the airlock hissing ominously as they stepped inside the belly of the beast. The corridors were dimly lit, twisting and turning like the insides of some great cosmic creature. "Keep it tight," Vex said, scanning the area. "No telling what kind of welcoming committee they've got." As they moved deeper into the ship, Riven couldn't help but marvel at the alien architecture. It was sleek and organic, a far cry from the utilitarian designs of human craft. "Think we'll find anything useful?" "With our luck, we'll find the mess hall," Vex replied. They turned a corner, only to come face to face with a group of alien soldiers. "Looks like we're about to find out," Riven said, raising his weapon. The aliens clicked and chittered, advancing with an unsettling grace. Riven and Vex fired in unison, sending bolts of plasma scorching through the air. The aliens dropped, their bodies emitting a foul-smelling vapor. "That's the pheromones," Vex said, wrinkling his nose. "Guess they weren't lying." "Smells like a frat house after a party," Riven commented, stepping over the bodies. They continued onward, navigating the labyrinthine corridors with the help of a stolen alien datapad. The ship shuddered around them as if sensing the intruders within. "Keep moving," Vex urged, eyes scanning for threats. "We need to find their communication hub. And if it's guarded by more of these pheromone-spewing nightmares," Riven asked. "Then we spray and pray," Vex replied. They reached a large chamber filled with strange, organic machinery pulsing with an eerie light. "This must be it," Riven said, approaching the control panel. "Looks like something out of a nightmare," Vex muttered, watching Riven work his magic. "Give me a minute," Riven said, fingers flying over the alien console. "I need to figure out how to disrupt their signals." Vex stood guard, his weapon ready as more aliens approached. "No pressure, mate. Just an entire species breathing down our necks." Riven worked quickly, deciphering the alien language as best he could. Almost there. With a final keystroke, the machinery around them erupted in a cacophony of sound and light. "Got it," Riven shouted over the din. The aliens convulsed, their wailing reaching a fever pitch before they collapsed, rendered inert by the feedback loop Riven had created. "Looks like we crashed their party," Vex said, grinning. "Let's hope they don't invite us back," Riven replied, already heading for the exit. They raced through the ship, alarms blaring in their wake. The Rust Bucket awaited them, engines primed for a quick getaway. "Think we made a dent?" Riven asked as they lifted off, the alien vessel shrinking into the distance. More like a scratch, Vex replied. But it's a start. As they made their way back to Lunaris, the colony's lights blinking on the horizon, Riven couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the cynicism. You know, he said, maybe we stand a chance after all. Vex chuckled, shaking his head. Don't get too comfortable. There's a long road ahead. Riven nodded, staring out at the stars. Yeah, but at least we're on it. Their victory, small as it was, felt like a defiant middle finger to the cosmos. And that, Riven thought, was a start. The aliens didn't waste any time with formalities. One moment, Lunaris was its usual decaying self, with flickering neon signs, half-hearted street vendors, and a general sense of ennui. The next, chaos erupted as the central hub of the colony exploded in a spectacular shower of debris and disillusionment. Riven watched the whole damned thing from the safety, or illusion of it, aboard the rust bucket as they made their approach. Well, shit, he muttered, gripping the control levers with white-knuckled resolve. Looks like they decided to RSVP after all. Vex leaned over from the co-pilot seat, his expression a mix of surprise and grim amusement. Guess they didn't like our fireworks display. Or maybe they just really hate architecture, Riven replied, steering the ship toward the smoking ruin that had once been the hub of their miserable little colony. Time to see if we've still got a home to return to. The landing wasn't pretty, but then again, neither was the landscape. Smoke curled upward in ghostly fingers, and fires crackled along the edges of the shattered buildings. The air tasted of burnt metal and despair, a taste that would probably stick around longer than an unwanted guest. You know, Vex said as they disembarked, I always thought the end of the world would have more of a soundtrack. More Wagner, less whimper. Maybe we'll get lucky, and one of these aliens is a frustrated composer, Riven suggested, scanning the wreckage for signs of life, human or otherwise. Let's just hope they save their sympathy symphonies for later. They picked their way through the rubble, stepping over the remnants of what had once been Lunaris's pride and joy. The hub had been the colony's backbone, and now it lay fractured and exposed like the ribs of a carcass picked clean by vultures. Or aliens. Probably not much difference at this point. Looks like we're not the only ones who made it out, Vex noted, pointing toward a group of survivors huddled around a makeshift shelter. The ragtag ensemble included a few familiar faces, miners, technicians, a couple of government suits who looked decidedly out of place without their cozy offices to hide in. Well, I'll be damned, Riven said with a hint of a smile. Cockroaches really do survive anything. The survivors looked up as they approached, and a few even managed weak smiles. One of them, a grizzled miner with a face like crumpled parchment, gave a nod. Figured you'd show up eventually, Riven. Heard you like making things difficult. Riven shrugged. What can I say? I like a challenge. A woman in a soot-stained jumpsuit stepped forward, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion etched into her features. Any chance you've got a plan? Because all we've got is a lot of oh shit and know what next. Vex snorted. That's more foresight than most of Lunaris on a good day. We might have something, Riven said, his mind already racing to connect the disjointed pieces of their situation. But first, we need to figure out what the hell we're up against. As if on cue, a distant explosion rattled the ground beneath their feet, followed by a burst of alien chatter over the comm links, the sound like a garbled, angry symphony of crickets and static. Riven grimaced. Sounds like they've got a lot to say. Probably ordering takeout, Vex quipped, but his humor was thin, stretched tight over the tension thrumming between them all. Riven turned to the group, taking charge despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. All right, listen up. We need to get our hands on some of that alien tech. If we can understand how it ticks, maybe we can turn it against them. He paused, letting the words sink in. Anyone here good at reverse engineering? A young technician raised a hand, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. I can help. I've got a knack for breaking things down. Perfect, Riven said, nodding. Vex, you're with me. Let's go see if we can find something worth scavenging. The group dispersed, each person with a task, a purpose that felt like a lifeline in the swirling chaos. Riven and Vex moved through the debris-strewn streets, their eyes peeled for any sign of alien machinery or equipment. "You think we can actually pull this off?" Vex asked as they ducked beneath a collapsed awning. "Not a clue," Riven admitted, "but we've got two choices. We fight, or we roll over and let them tickle our tummies." "Not into that," Vex replied, his tone wry. "I'm ticklish." The pair continued their search, the oppressive atmosphere pressing in around them like an unwelcome reminder of their plight. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. Tucked away in the remains of a demolished warehouse lay a cache of alien tech, glistening with an unnatural sheen that screamed "don't touch" in every language. "Well, look at that," Riven said, shaking his head in disbelief. Christmas came early. Vex crouched beside him, examining the array of devices. "I don't suppose you know how to operate any of this," Riven snorted. "I'm a hacker, not a miracle worker. But give me some time and I might just figure out how to turn these into something useful." They set to work, the air around them heavy with the hum of alien machinery and the acrid scent of burning circuitry. Riven's fingers flew over the devices, his mind a whirlwind of data and possibilities. "This one looks like a power source," Vex said, holding up a small, glowing orb. "Probably worth more than the whole damn colony." "Great, we'll sell it on the black market if we survive," Riven replied, not missing a beat as he continued to manipulate the alien tech. "Right now, we need to focus on not getting obliterated." The hours slipped by in a blur of frantic activity and anxious anticipation. With each passing moment, Riven felt the weight of the colonist's survival pressing down on him like a leaden cloak. Finally, he leaned back, wiping sweat from his brow. "Okay, I think we've got something." Vex looked up from his own work, eyes bright with hope. "You figured it out?" "Sort of," Riven replied, gesturing to a cobbled-together array of alien components. "This should disrupt their communication again, at least for a while. Buy us some time to regroup and figure out our next move." "Good enough for me," Vex said, nodding. "Let's get this show on the road." They returned to the group of survivors, Riven outlining their plan with the kind of confidence that could only come from desperation. The crowd listened, their expressions a mix of doubt and reluctant hope. "All right, folks," Riven concluded, "let's give these bastards a taste of their own medicine." The survivors sprang into action, the atmosphere crackling with a renewed sense of purpose. As the makeshift team worked to deploy Riven's device, the air around them seemed to hum with anticipation. "Think they'll see it coming?" Vex asked, his voice low. "Probably not," Riven replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "And if they do, well, at least we'll go out with a bang." The activation of the device was a quiet affair, almost anticlimactic in its simplicity, but the effect was immediate. Across the colony, the alien chatter ceased, replaced by a cacophony of static and confused clicks. "We did it," the young technician breathed, her eyes wide with awe. "For now," Riven said, ever the realist. "But this is just the beginning. We've bought ourselves some time, but it's only a matter of when, not if they come back." The group fell silent, the weight of Riven's words settling over them like a shroud. It was a sobering realization, the knowledge that their temporary victory was just that, temporary. "So what's next?" Vex asked, breaking the silence. Riven considered the question, his mind racing with possibilities and pitfalls. "We figure out how to make this permanent. We take their tech, learn their weaknesses, and turn their own game against them." "Sounds like a tall order," the grizzled miner said, rubbing his stubbled chin. "You're asking us to play a game we've never even seen before." "True," Riven replied, nodding. "But look at it this way, we've been playing on hard mode since day one. Maybe it's time we start playing to win." The miner chuckled, the sound rough and genuine. "Can't argue with that logic." The survivors dispersed once more, each person acutely aware of their role in the unfolding drama. As the last of the group disappeared into the shadows, Riven and Vex lingered, their eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "You think we've got a shot?" Vex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Riven considered the question, his gaze distant and unfocused. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know one thing: if we're going down, we're taking as many of those bastards with us as we can. That's the spirit, Vex said with a grin. Misery loves company, after all. As they turned back to the task at hand, the stars above twinkled with an indifferent light, a reminder of the vast, uncaring universe that watched their struggle with detached interest. But for Riven, Lunaris was more than just a battered outpost on the edge of oblivion. It was home, and he was damn well going to fight for it. With a final, determined nod, Riven set to work. The battle was far from over, but for the first time he felt the faint stirrings of hope. It was a fragile thing, delicate and easily crushed, but it was enough to keep him going. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to keep them all alive. Riven Solace was beginning to doubt the wisdom of their ragtag group of survivors, which was saying something considering he often doubted everything, including the existence of wisdom itself. The makeshift shelter was a patchwork of metal sheets, duct tape, and sheer desperation, and it was barely holding together against the harsh lunar winds. But it wasn't the shelter that was the problem. It was the people inside it. "Is that supposed to be food?" Vex Farron asked, poking at a tin of something that looked suspiciously like cat food but smelled worse. "Better than the shoe leather we had yesterday," Riven replied, leaning against a metal girder that hadn't given up on life just yet. "Besides, it builds character." "Yeah, well, I've got enough character to last several lifetimes," Vex grumbled, pushing the tin away with a look of disgust that was a perfect blend of annoyance and hope that he might never have to eat again. Tech, the pint-sized technician, was fiddling with an alien device in the corner, his fingers moving with the speed of someone who was either a genius or a lunatic. With Tech, it was usually a healthy mix of both. "If I can get this thing to work, we might have a shot at making a decent meal out of whatever's left in the storeroom. Tech, if you turn that thing on and we all end up glowing in the dark, I'm holding you personally responsible," Riven said, his tone only half joking. "Relax, it's just a converter." "Worst that can happen is a massive explosion." Tech shrugged, not looking up from his work. "And if it does blow, it'll be a hell of a light show. Better than any fireworks display back on Earth." Earth. The word hung in the air like a ghost, a reminder of what they'd all lost. Lunaris was a rotten husk of a colony, but it was their rotten husk, and for better or worse, it was all they had left. Riven shook off the nostalgia like a bad hangover and turned his attention back to the group. "So, what's the plan, genius?" the grizzled miner from earlier, a man named Zed, asked, his voice rougher than a sandstorm. He'd been around longer than most of them, which meant he was either really lucky or really stubborn. "Funny you should ask," Riven replied with a smirk that was mostly bravado. "I've been poking around in their tech, and I think I've found a weakness." "That's a big if," Vex cut in, crossing his arms and leaning back until his chair creaked in protest. "And if is doing a lot of heavy lifting here." Riven ignored him. "Their tech relies heavily on a central power source. Take that out and we might just have a chance to knock them off balance." "You mean blow it up?" the young technician, Mira, interjected, her eyes wide with a mix of excitement and fear. "Because I'm all for fireworks if it means getting rid of those alien bastards." "See, that's the spirit," Tech chimed in, grinning like he'd just invented fire. "Nothing says leave us alone like a good explosion." "So you want us to just stroll into their base and blow up their power source?" Zed asked, his skepticism as thick as his beard. "I never said it wouldn't be risky," Riven replied, his expression sobering. "But sitting around here waiting for them to come back isn't an option." The group lapsed into silence, the weight of the decision settling over them like a shroud. It was a crazy plan, bordering on suicidal, but it was the only one they had. As if sensing the mood, the alien chatter over the comm links returned, a discordant symphony of insect-like clicks and hisses that set Riven's teeth on edge. "They're tightening the noose," Vex muttered, his eyes narrowing at the sound. "Then let's give them a reason to loosen it," Riven said, his voice steely with determination. The plan was set into motion with a speed born of desperation. Mira and Tech were tasked with creating a diversion, something flashy and loud to draw attention away from the real target. Meanwhile, Riven, Vex, and Zed would make their way to the alien base, a sprawling monolith of blackened metal and harsh angles that loomed over the colony like a predator. "Remember, stay low and keep quiet," Riven instructed, glancing at Vex and Zed as they moved through the shadows. "We've got one shot at this." Yeah, we know the drill," Vex replied, his sarcasm a familiar comfort. "Though if we get caught, I'm blaming you." "Fair enough," Riven said, though he knew the blame wouldn't fall on any one person if they failed. It would be a collective failure, one that would cost them everything. As they approached the perimeter of the alien base, the air grew heavier, thick with the promise of danger. Riven's heart pounded a steady rhythm against his ribs, a reminder that he was still alive, still fighting, even as the odds stacked higher against them. Tech's distraction came in the form of a series of explosions that lit up the night sky, each one a cacophony of sound and light that echoed across the barren landscape. Alien voices rose in alarm, their mechanical tones tinged with confusion. "That's our cue," Riven said, motioning for Vex and Zed to follow him. The trio moved swiftly, slipping through the chaos like shadows, their movements practiced and precise. The entrance to the base was unguarded, the aliens too distracted by the commotion to notice the intruders in their midst. Inside, the base was an alien landscape of blinking lights and humming machinery, the very air humming with energy. Riven's neural jack itched beneath his skin, the proximity to such advanced technology setting his nerves on edge. "This way," he whispered, leading them through a labyrinth of corridors and passageways that seemed to stretch into infinity. It was a testament to their luck, or perhaps their sheer stubbornness, that they reached the power core without encountering any resistance. The room was a cavernous space, dominated by a towering structure that pulsated with an eerie, otherworldly light. "There it is," Zed breathed, his eyes wide with awe and trepidation. "Now we just have to blow it up," Vex said, glancing at Riven with a raised eyebrow. "Simple, right? Piece of cake," Riven replied, though his heart was racing in his chest. "Just have to plant the charges and get out before it goes boom." The task was easier said than done. The power core thrummed with energy, each pulse a reminder of the volatile forces contained within. Riven worked quickly, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Vex and Zed stood watch, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "Hurry it up, Riven," Vex urged, his voice tense. "I don't fancy getting vaporized today." "Almost there," Riven replied, feeling the comforting click of the last charge locking into place. "Okay, let's move." They retraced their steps, retracing their path through the labyrinthine corridors with the urgency of men who knew their time was running out. The alien chatter had grown louder, a cacophony of clicks and hisses that echoed through the base like an alarm. "Go!" Riven shouted, pushing Vex and Zed ahead of him as they raced for the exit. The explosion came seconds later, a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath their feet. The alien base shuddered, its walls groaning under the strain as the power core erupted in a brilliant cascade of light and heat. Riven stumbled, the shockwave nearly knocking him off his feet. He caught himself on a railing, his heart pounding in his chest as he watched the base begin to collapse in on itself. "We did it," Vex said, his voice breathless with disbelief. "For now," Riven replied, his eyes fixed on the smoking ruin of the alien base. "Let's just hope it buys us enough time to regroup." Their victory was short-lived, the reality of their situation settling over them like a cold, hard truth. The aliens wouldn't take this lightly, and it was only a matter of time before they regrouped and retaliated. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Riven felt a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out, but it was enough to keep him going. They'd struck a blow against their oppressors, and with a little bit of luck and a whole lot of grit, they might just live to fight another day. "All right, let's get back to the others," Riven said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at his gut. "We've got a lot of work to do." As they made their way back to the shelter, Riven couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of something much larger than themselves. The aliens had tightened their grip on the colony, but they'd also exposed a weakness, one that Riven intended to exploit to its fullest. "Think we'll make it?" Vex asked, his tone as irreverent as ever. "Ask me again when we're not one misstep away from annihilation," Riven replied, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Sounds good," Vex said with a grin. "In the meantime, keep your head down and your fingers crossed." As they approached the shelter, the familiar faces of their fellow survivors came into view, their expressions a mix of relief and apprehension. They'd bought themselves a reprieve, but the fight was far from over. For Riven Solace and the people of Lunaris, the battle had only just begun. But with every setback, with every victory, they were reminded of one undeniable truth. They were human, and they'd be damned if they went down without a fight. Riven Solace leaned against the grossly misnamed rust bucket, which, despite its name, had more in common with a floating pile of scrap than any vessel that should be allowed in the void of space. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and on Lunaris, where the only choice was between death by alien or death by starvation, the rust bucket was as good as it got. "Vex, you ready for some good old-fashioned looting?" Riven asked, watching as Vex Farron fiddled with his neural jack. The device looked like someone had gutted a toaster and tried to merge it with a blender, but if it worked, Riven supposed he could overlook the aesthetics. Vex glanced up, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Just about." "Of course, by good old-fashioned, I assume you mean suicidal and completely insane." "That's the spirit," Riven replied, grinning. He checked the makeshift weapon slung over his shoulder, an old mining laser modified for combat. It was about as reliable as a politician's promise, but it was better than nothing. At least when it worked, it could turn an alien's head into a fine mist. "You remember the plan?" Yeah, Vex said, rolling his eyes. "Go in, grab all we can carry, and run like our arses are on fire. Easy peasy, see, told you it was simple." Riven slapped Vex on the back. "Now let's see if we can avoid getting vaporized." The alien supply depot loomed ahead, a structure of cold, black metal and hostile architecture, like something out of a sci-fi film's fever dream. The aliens had built it in the heart of Lunaris, a constant reminder of their suffocating grasp on the once thriving colony. Riven and Vex slunk through the shadows, their movements honed by necessity and desperation. The corridor leading to the depot's entrance was a mess of twisted metal and debris, a graveyard of past skirmishes and broken dreams. "Is it just me, or do these aliens have a real flair for interior design?" Vex whispered, peering around a corner. "Yeah, if you like your decor hostile and vaguely homicidal," Riven replied. "Keep your eyes peeled. Those guards could be anywhere." They crept closer, the depot's heavily reinforced entrance visible through the gloom. Riven's grip on his weapon tightened. The last thing he wanted was to get caught with his pants down in front of an alien patrol. Vex fiddled with his neural jack again, the device humming softly. "I'm picking up chatter. Sounds like they're distracted, probably still dealing with the aftermath of our little fireworks show." "Good," Riven said. "Means they won't be expecting us." They reached the entrance without incident, which was either a minor miracle or a sign that the universe was saving something truly horrendous for later. Riven wasn't sure which option he preferred. "All right, let's do this," Riven said, activating the door controls. The bulkhead slid open with a disgruntled hiss, revealing the interior of the depot, a cavernous space filled with crates and unfamiliar alien tech. "Jackpot," Vex muttered, eyes wide. "Don't get too excited," Riven cautioned. "We're not out of the woods yet." They moved quickly, darting between rows of crates, rummaging through alien supplies like a pair of overcaffeinated raccoons. Most of the items were incomprehensible, but they managed to find a stash of food packs that, while unappetizing, were at least vaguely edible. "Think the aliens have a taste for spam?" Vex asked, holding up a pack of something that squished alarmingly under his fingers. Better than the alternative, Riven replied, throwing a pack into his bag. Besides, you'd be amazed what you can stomach when starving. As they continued their search, the depot's lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Riven's nerves were on edge, every creak and groan of the structure setting his teeth on edge. "You ever get the feeling we're being watched?" Vex asked, his voice low. "Constantly," Riven said. "It's like a bad reality TV show. You're always on camera whether you like it or not." Their banter was cut short by the sound of footsteps. Alien footsteps. Riven's heart leapt into his throat as he motioned for Vex to hide. They ducked behind a crate, holding their breath as the footsteps drew closer. The aliens entered the depot, their forms silhouetted against the harsh lights. They moved with a fluid grace that belied their insectoid appearance, their voices a soft symphony of clicks and hisses. "Well, shit," Vex breathed, barely audible over the alien chatter. "Stay calm," Riven whispered. "They're probably just doing their rounds. We wait for them to pass, then we bolt." "Got it." "Yeah," Vex said, though his voice trembled slightly. The aliens moved deeper into the depot, their attention focused on a console embedded in the wall. Riven took the opportunity to nudge Vex, nodding toward the exit. "Now's our chance. Now's 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 chance. Now's our chance. Now's our chance. Now's our chance. chance, now's our 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 chance, now's now's our chance, 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 now's chant, now's our 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 chant, chance, now's our 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 chance, now's now's our chance, 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 now's our chance
our chance. Now's 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 our chance. Now's
our chance. Now's our our chant, now's 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 our chance, 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 chance, now's our 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 chance,